Okay, here we are. The title of today's study is Useless to Useful. And so we've been spending time in these chapters of 21 and 22 of First Samuel and looking at really where David had gone bad himself, didn't trust God with running from Saul, telling lies, all that sort of stuff. So we'll not necessarily rehearse all those things. But after he left Gath, if you remember, he was feigning madness while he was with the king of Gath. But we learned last week that he learned an awful lot from that situation. So David then left Gath and went to a cave called Adullam. And and this was really back where he needed to be. And so oftentimes, we end up running, we end up, wanting to get away from things, which is understandable, and, even when you're a Christian for a long period of time, there's still times where you just want to go, stop the world. I want to get off, and let's go away. And so we want to run, I've had the temptation of, running down to Dublin, getting on a plane and disappearing, but that's not what God's will is. That's not, God has brought me to this place to bless other people, for which I hope that is the case. But anyway, it's being where God wants you to be. And so David then went to this particular cave, and this is where we're going to pick this up and have a discussion about that situation, and then look at the impact then that David has on other people, and that's what our lives do. Our lives have impact on other people that are around us. So let me just get myself. Right. So we're going to look at David's men, and as we look at David's men, we're then going to jump to the end of 2 Samuel because there's a list there of David's mighty men. But what I want to talk about is, where did these mighty men come from? Okay. So let's see. Why is this not working? Nothing's working today. Okay, that was off. This is on. That says it's on. It's found the thing. Right, nothing's, my other camera didn't work there, so I don't know what's going on there. So this is not functioning either, so I don't know what's happening there. No, okay. Even though it's switched on and it seems to be connected, but sure. Anyway, so we'll just use manual override. Okay. So it says here at the beginning of chapter 22, these first 5 verses, it says, David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, everyone who was discontented gathered to him. And so he became captain over them. And there was about 400 men with him. And then David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and mother come here with you till I know what God will do for me. And so he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Now the prophet Gad said to David, do not stay in the stronghold, depart and go to the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. So, sometimes when you read the Bible and you read these little stories, you go, oh, okay. You generally don't know where these places are. And sometimes we don't even know how to pronounce the names of these places. And uh, and we just kind of continue past it. And but I find that this particular set of verses is incredibly instructive in terms of um, uh, David having men gather to him and how he changes them. Okay, so now we have a variety of underlined and highlighted things here. So the people that were gathered to him was of three sort of descriptions. They all begin with D there. These were people who were in distress. These were people that were in debt. And these were people that were discontented, or another way of looking at that, because it is a compound word in Hebrew, which basically means bitter of soul. So, can you imagine this kind of crowd coming to you, stressed out, in debt, and bitter? You know, it's just it doesn't sound like a real fun bunch, you know. And if I was a businessman, I wouldn't be hiring these guys, you know, because they're just really cooked up in their heads about a variety of things. So anyway, so we have, as it says there in verse 2, everyone who's in distress, everyone who's in debt, everyone who is discontented gathered to him. So he became captain over them. And so we're going to look at these words here and discover what they're about. And it says that there were about 400 men with him. So all these 400 men were all in one or all three categories. Now, after this, David goes to Mizpah of Moab. So he's traveling from where he is in Judah here over on the other side of the Dead Sea and goes over to Moab. Now we know that Moab is not a place of blessing. It's not a place that you should be, because there's ungodly people there. The whole nation of Moab started off from an incestuous relationship that Lot's daughter had with himself, you know, and so it was a bad thing from the word go. So now, but David makes this comment here in verse 3. He says, please let my father and my mother come here with you till I know what God will do for me. So David, you know, because he knows that from the previous chapter, got things messed up, told lies, using the enemy's sword, going and feigning, you know, madness and, you know, all this stuff, you know, because there's no writing in there where it says, and David asked God or David sought God in any of these things. But here we have David going, even though he's in again, another bad spot, you know, Moab is not a good place to be, but at least he's going till I know what God will do for me. Okay. So anyway, he has his family there. And so then the prophet Gad says to David, so this is a man of God. In verse 5, he says, do not stay in the stronghold, depart, go to the land of Judah. In other words, go back to where you're supposed to be. And so David didn't look at his Moab situation and say, actually, it's kind of cushy here. We're safe from, you know, Saul chasing me about, because this is going back to where Saul is, you know, this particular part of the world. But it says there, so David departed and he went into the forest of Hereth. So David obeyed what the man of God, Gad, was saying to him. So there's a variety of things that are going on in this particular passage. So what I want to do is talk about these messed up men. All right. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we're all messed up at one level or another. You know, so we're messed up in how we think. We're messed up in what we do. We're messed up in what we say. We always stick our foot in it, and then we regret that and we backpedal, and then we say we're sorry to so and so. But you know, sometimes when you say things, they can't be unheard. You know, and so anyway, I want to talk about these men that were in distress. Um, Now, the the word there for distress in Hebrew is matzuk. Okay, and we'll just talk about what that means. And what it literally means is a narrow place, the feeling of confinement, which means you're sort of boxed in or squeezed. It talks about disability, and it talks about anguish. So there's a lot of feelings and words that lend itself to how one would feel if you are in a claustrophobic sort of narrow spot, you know. And the illustration that I use in regard to this word distress is when I was hiking in Montana many years ago with my uncle. We did a hike at a place called the Gates of the Mountain Wilderness area, which is up in the Rocky Mountains, and it is the headwaters of the Missouri River. So, and the Missouri River eventually becomes a very, very big river, which then empties into another really big river called the Mississippi River, and it then empties into the Gulf of Mexico, which President Trump now calls the Gulf of America. Okay, so whatever you want to call it. Which is the third longest river system in the world. The first longest river system in the world is the Nile, which is in Africa. And then the second one is the Amazon river system. And the third one is the Missouri Mississippi system. So anyway, we were up at the headwaters of this thing. Absolutely beautiful spot. But one of the areas that we hiked through was a place called the Refrigerator Canyon. And I did get pictures of the Refrigerator Canyon online, but the problem with pictures of things with no people in them is you don't understand the scale. So because you could see a whole pile of rocks, and it could be this big or it could be really huge, you know. So, but if there's no people standing there, you have no idea what it is. So I meant to go and dig up a picture of me standing in the Refrigerator Canyon, but it's up in cyberspace and would take some archaeological digging to go and sort that out, you know. So anyway, you know, you have to get out chisels and brushes and, you know, and hammers and, you know, different things and blow it off, you know. So, but anyway, so there is this picture of me going through the Refrigerator Canyon, and the Refrigerator Canyon is in spots is about as wide as your chair, with cliffs that go up hundreds of feet on either side. So the sun don't get to the bottom of the Refrigerator Canyon very easily, if at all. And that's why it's called the Refrigerator Canyon, because it's 20 degrees cooler, you know, down in this thing. And and it's an extraordinary place to walk through when you're walking through the bottom of it. Not a good place to be if there is a thunderstorm and a big dump of rain, because if you're at the bottom of this thing, you're going to be washed out and probably not survive. But it is very, very narrow. And now, anytime I feel a bit stressed, you know, you all know what that does for you physically. So, you know, when I'm stressed, I kind of go, oh, you know, you feel sort of, you know, you just want, you want to get out, you know, and get to us. So anyway, these men that were gathered to David were in that spot. They were in confinement. You know, they felt very disabled, and that produces this whole sense of anguish. And now, when you look at the letters in Hebrew there, as they're up on that screen with the letter Mem, the letter Zadeh, the letter Vav, and then the last letter is a letter called Kuf. And when you string those letters together, you get the chaos of the hook that establishes what follows. And when I think about that, you know, distress is chaotic, it's like a hook that gets in you, and what it establishes is this idea of anguish. So it's a very, very descriptive sort of word that is in this thing. In fact, the word that makes the M sound there, mem, is associated with water, but it's an idea of waves and turbulence and all that kind of stuff. So you can imagine if you're in this canyon and then there is water coming down, it's bad crack. Okay, so um, so that was the first crowd that was gathered to David. The second batch of people were the people that were in debt. Now, that particular word is a Hebrew word called nasha, and basically what that word means is to impose, to place under pressure. And strangely enough, it is also associated with being deluded or to seduce morally or to lead astray mentally. So now, for those of us that have any kind of debt, you know, now some of us have lived in the mortgage world. Some of us have lived in the world of borrowing for a car and that kind of thing. Generally, if those things are managed and you're in a good state of affairs and it's a cash flow issue, you pay your monthly thing and you generally don't worry about it. You don't necessarily feel under pressure. You don't feel it as an imposition. And nor do you feel like you've been, led astray in some way, because you go into these things generally with your eyes open. But there's other sorts of debt that people find themselves getting into where they're this is kind of the payday loan kind of stuff, or going to your local paramilitary or something like that and getting a lot of, quid to tide you over, which once you do that, you will never, ever get out of debt. That's just how that works. But when you're in those kinds of environments, where it's debt that you have not gone into with both eyes open, it then weighs on you. It sits on you. It exhibits an awful lot of pressure. So, now we may have experienced that with debt. Sometimes when we use credit cards, for instance, we would say, well, what I'll do is I'll put this on a credit card. I'll pay it at the end of the month, and then you don't have enough money to pay it at the end of the month. And then you let it go. And then you start to get into this world of, oh, I'll just pay the minimum payment. And then when you get into that world, you're never out of it, So because the amount of interest building up, compared to what the minimum payment is, some of us have been there, So and so we understand the sheer pressure of that. And then you're looking around behind you, and you're going, you just feel more and more weighed down. And so if you think about these men, everybody who was in debt, these are people that are under this kind of pressure. These are people that are perhaps deluded into things, and they're being seduced, morally, and so it's not just debt in terms of money. It could be blackmail. It could be a whole variety of things emotionally that you just feel like you're under an awful lot of pressure. So can you imagine these kinds of men coming to David with all this stuff, And then we have the discontented people. So if we think it's bad enough, with the distress and the debt, then we have this discontented thing. And so that comes from a word. Part of this word in Hebrew is mara, which means to be bitter. And when you look at this word, it really talks about a chaotic individual. And if you think about what bitterness does to you, it does make you chaotic in your mind. It just you don't know where to go with it. So you blame. Uh, wasn't me, it's them, and using, blah, blah, blah. Your life and your mind just become a big hodgepodge of mess. And now, oddly enough, the word Mary or the name Mary means bitter. It comes from this particular word. So it's we find that the name Mary is a nice name, and it is a nice name. But then when you think about its meaning, it's good, Uh, but basically, it means to be bitter, grieved, heavy, having to do with the soul and life. And so when you look at these three words, you can see really the idea of heaviness is very much part and parcel of these three words. You're in a narrow place, confined, which is pressure like that, and then you're bitter in your soul, and so there's this heaviness and this grief that is upon you. So, and that's what sin does in your life. Sin creates these sorts of environments. So, but these are the kind of people that David specializes in. And these are the kinds of people that God specializes in. So if you can look in your own life and say, you know what, I'm there. I'm in the distress camp. I'm in the debt camp. I'm in the discontented, bitter soul camp, and I don't know how to get out of this thing. So let's look at the next word that is that then talks about David, which is the leader here. And it is this word captain. So because it says that all these people were gathered unto David, and he became captain over them. So now the word for captain there is the word sar, and which can be translated prince in the Bible. It's not necessarily king. Okay, king is Malik. But this idea of a prince or a captain, somebody who is in charge, somebody who exercises authority. The Hebrew letters there is Sheen and Resh, and what they talk about is a consumed person. So now that could be consumed in a bad thing, or it can be consumed in a good thing. Now, David is consumed with these particular men, but he's consumed to the point where I can do things with these men. I can make them better. I can change them. So that's what that word is. And in Isaiah chapter 9, as we're coming up to Christmas, where it says, he shall be called, Wonderful Counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Well, that's Sar Shalom, so prince. So it's the same word that's in there. But so it means prince, or means leader, means captain. Now, one thing a leader needs to do, especially in Christian or godly circles, is that captain needs to desire to hear from God, and hear from God now. Because David had then again got these men together, got these 400 men together, which eventually, incidentally, became David's mighty men. And so in a few minutes, we're going to look at David's mighty men, because these were the guys that were the stressed out, in debt, and discontented people. But in order for David to lead these men properly, he had to hear from God, and not down the road, but he needed to hear from God now. And it's the same thing with ourselves. If we want to have an influence with people and get on with it, well, we need to hear what God is saying to us now. Not don't say, well, we'll see what God says tomorrow, or says next week, or something like that. We'll leave it till then. David was interested in the now. And so God then relays his message via the prophet Gad. So when you're desiring to hear, God will send you somebody. Yeah, or he. Um, and I was talking to somebody there the other day, and he was in a bad place, and then he heard from God. God spoke to him in His Word, and he acted on it. Okay, so God will certainly use His Word. He'll use godly individuals. He'll use the preacher in church. He could use today. He could use a whole variety of things. You could see something up in the sky in terms of a cloud or a bird, or God can use His creation. God can use absolutely anything. God can use dreams. So God can get into your mind and alter your thoughts. It's a wonderful thing that God actually knows what you think. I've said this before. The enemy doesn't know what you think, but he knows how you think based on what you say and what you do. But the devil wants to come along and says, I can make you think stuff. Now, the devil can't make you think anything, but God can, as we commit our way to Him, as it says in Proverbs 16, He then establishes our thoughts. So David, speaks to his message and uses the prophet Gad to do this. So this was a common method back then of how God spoke, because people like David, yes, could have heard from the Lord directly, but oftentimes how that worked was that they had a seer or a prophet, handy nearby that was, somebody who was in touch with God. Okay, and then as David then hears this, he then obeys, because that's what he did. He departed, went back to Judah, went back to the place where he was. Because, see, David was running. David was running from Saul, and he was using his fear to drive him to those things, which caused him then to do all the wrong stuff. And so now David is listening to God, and so he is therefore going and obeying God in that way. Now, the sad thing, though, is because of what David did in terms of going to Ahimelech, the priest, and all that kind of stuff, and because your boy Doeg was there, who was Saul's chief herdsman, who wasn't even an Israelite, he was an Edomite. He goes and squeals on David, and then tells lies about David to Saul, and then Saul gets all torqued off, and then orders his own men to go and kill the priest and kill all the priest's men. But they don't do that because, well, they were saying, well, the man's the priest, he can't be doing that. And so, but Doeg sort of raised his hand, well, sure, I'll kill him for you. So you can end up with some very ungodly sort of consequences as a result of your own mismanagement. So we have to be very, very aware that our decision making in our lives can have, especially if it's bad decision making, can have bad impact on people. So often when I'm dealing with folk, from addiction backgrounds, they'll acknowledge that they're doing themselves damage, which is true, but they do not acknowledge the damage that they're doing to other people. They'll go, oh well, they can get over it. It's not, well, it's just my problem. So their interpretation of what's going on is all warped and messed up. So now, what I want to do at this particular point is then go from this idea of uselessness to usefulness. And this is now talking about these men who were once distressed, in debt, and discontent. And David has now taken these men and has made them his mighty men. So these guys are coming from some pretty dreadful backgrounds. But in 2 Samuel 23, which is getting down toward the end of 2 Samuel, it has this synopsis of different men of different names that do different exploits for God. So we'll give this a read here. Now, these are the names of the mighty men whom David had. Josheb, Bathshebeth, the Tachmonite. Boy, there's a handful of stuff. Chief among the captains. He was called Adino, so this is actually the name of this man. The Esnite, because he had killed 800 men at one time. After him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Ahohite, one of the three mighty men with David when they defied the Philistines who were gathered there for battle, and the men of Israel had retreated. He arose and attacked the Philistines until his hand was weary, and his hand had stuck to the sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. And the people returned after him only to plunder, and after him was Shammah, the son of Agi, the Herorite. The Philistines had gathered together into a troop where there was a piece of ground full of lentils, and so the people fled from the Philistines, but he stationed himself in the middle of the field, defended it, and killed the Philistines. So the Lord brought about a great victory. Now, again, I think it's useful to highlight certain things, give them a bit of color and all that kind of stuff in order to get what's going on. So there are three individuals that are named here that were described as David's mighty men. And I'm of the firm belief that these were men that at one point in their life were distressed, in debt, and discontent. So now, the first guy that is talked about here, Adino, let me just give you the King James version of this. This is the New King James Bible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the Authorized Version, because the Authorized Version actually highlights certain things in different sorts of ways so that you know what this stuff means. So let me just throw that on the screen, okay? And I'll go back to the colored stuff in a minute. So it says, these be the names of the mighty men David had, the Tachmonite that sat in the seat. Now, that's what that Joshua Bathshebeth name thing, that big long batch of stuff. That's what that means, is he sat in the seat. So, because when you read it in the New King James, you look at that big long name, which I struggle to pronounce, and you go, okay, what was that? And then he's called Adino. You know, so you have a name, and then you have another name, but they're the same guy. You know, so why do we have these different sorts of names? So when you go back to, say, you know, the Authorized Bible, well, it tells you that what actually that means is that the man sat in the seat. You know, so he had some kind of prominence. Okay, if he was sitting in a chair, it means he was somebody that was of authority. Because he was chief among the captains and so on. But the name Adino, again, if you go back to the King James, it says, there be the names of mighty men David had, the Tachmonite that sat in the seat, chief among the captains. The same was Adino, the Esnite. He lifted up his spear. Now, do you see where it says he lifted up his spear? That's in italics. Okay, so in the King James Bible, when you see something in italics, that means it wasn't in the original language. Okay, they put that in there in order to give clarity to what was part of the language. Okay, so now, so you'll see in a King James Bible a lot of italicized words. So, and again, oftentimes what the translators are doing is they're sticking that in order to make the thing make sense. But the reason that the King James people did this in this particular spot is because Adino's name means to lift up his spear. So what the King James translators are doing is they want you to know that what was important to this man was that he had a spear. So now that wasn't part of the original translation, but they wanted you to understand that. So now when you go back to the New King James there, you see he was called Adino, the Esnite, because he had killed 800 men at one time. Well, the thing was, yes, he killed them with a spear. So this is why it's useful to kind of go and look at different translations, because of how that wording is handled. So, because when you look at that, Adino, he had killed 800 men at one time. Well, good golly, what did he do? Did he do it with his bare hands? Did he, give him a biff or a punch or, what did he do? So, well, how this was done was that he was a man that handled things with a spear. So now, the rest of that particular passage is pretty much the same in the King James, but I found that interesting when you were sort of comparing those two things. But just to highlight that what Adino did, again, reflect back that this man at one point in his life was distressed, he was in debt, or he was bitter of soul. Now, we do not have a man here who is stressed out, who's in debt, or bitter of soul. He's a guy that has learned how to use a weapon. And he's learned how to use a weapon well, and he is also in an arena where he has authority. Why is he there? Because David put him there. So, and so what he does is he has killed 800 men at one time. Now, that's a lot of people. And now that looks nasty. It looks hard going. I mean, we get on the news every night and listen about Gaza and all that kind of stuff, and reading about Darfur and the Sudan and all that horrendous stuff that's going on, and we just hear about many people dying, and it's not the kind of thing that we really want to go and hear about. But the thing is that these particular men that he had killed were enemies of Israel, and he took a stand and he did what he needed to do. So the problem is with us, we get a bit mousy in terms of like standing up for the truth or something like that. And we just kind of sit and go, well, sure, that's what they do. So, and it's, important to say, no, we need to be in battle. Always remember, I've told this story about the monks of the Skellig Islands, when they were there in 500 and 600 AD, 9 miles off the coast of County Kerry, they weren't out there, for themselves. They were out there doing spiritual battle. They were out there doing spiritual warfare because that was the edge of the earth. And so these men went to the edge of the earth on behalf of the church and did battle on their knees. So in a sense, they killed the enemy, because they were before God. So then we have this next man here. After him was Eliezer, the son of Dodo. I don't know, sounds wrong, but anyway, one of the three mighty men with David when they had defied the Philistines who gathered there for battle. The men of Israel retreated. He arose and attacked the Philistines until his hand was weary and his hand had stuck to the sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. Now, Eliezer, I knew without having to look it up, I knew what it meant. Because when you start studying these words and studying and looking at patterns in names and things like that, I was like, okay, I'll ask you. Okay, what's El mean? God. Okay, right. So, and then Ezer, that's another word we learned some time ago. I don't know if anybody remembers that particular word. Ezer. Anyway, it means help. So God is my help, is what that man's name means. So, so he, again, one of the three mighty men with David, and it says that they defied the Philistines who had gathered there for battle. And it's interesting here, it says the men of Israel retreated. So all the other people that were around him scarpered off. But what does he do? What does he do as this man who has as his identity, God is my help? He arises, he attacks, and he attacks the Philistines until his hand was weary. So when you know that God is your help, then you'll arise. You won't be mousy. You know, as it says in Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So this man did not have the spirit of fear. Yes, back in the old days, he had a spirit of fear. He was distressed, he was in debt, and he was discontent. But David was made captain over him. And this is what Captain David does. And this is what King Jesus does for us, is he gets into our life and says, you know what? God's your help. So therefore, you can arise, you can attack, and you can do it until it's done. You know, it's wonderful to be able to sit with people again who actually, when they get Christ in their life, they start doing things and they'll do it until they get it finished. So many people I deal with, you know, stop at the first hurdle. So, and then there's this line here that's in yellow, the Lord brought about a great victory that day. So, you know, God always gets the glory in these things. And that's what, you know, when you compare this, this kind of conversation here with chapter 21 of 1 Samuel, where David wasn't acknowledging God or talking to God or doing any of these kinds of things. And yet here, because David, see, when you look through David's life, David learned lessons. It wasn't like Saul. Saul didn't learn his lessons. Saul was constantly going, yeah, but it was them and it wasn't me. Hey, I'm going to build a monument to myself because I obeyed God. Look at me. You know, he was a self-serving, selfish, self person. Saul's most important people in his life were me, myself, and I. You know, so where David was a man who says, you know what, I've got this wrong, but you know what, I'm going to go into the book here. I'm going to learn what to do, and I'm going to get it right. And he gets it right, and then he leads people to do it right. You know, so the Lord brought about a great victory that day because these men, these mighty men of David, they were people that looked to God. So, and then we have this last man here in this paragraph. The people returned after him only to plunder. Okay, verse 11, it says, after him was Shammah, the son of Agi, the Hararot. And the Philistines had gathered together into a troop where there was a piece of ground full of lentils, so food. So the people fled from the Philistines. That sounds an awful lot like Eliezer's situation. You know, the Philistines were gathered and for battle and all this kind of stuff. And here the Philistines are gathered to around this piece of ground with the lentils. And what do the people do? They flee. Okay, so with Eliezer's situation, the men of Israel retreated. Here, so the people fled from the Philistines. You know, this is what mousy people do. You know, so I understand that it's hard sometimes facing up to the enemy. You know, it's hard facing up to your own fears. It's hard facing up, but let's take courage from these things and learn from these people. So now Shammah's name, very interestingly, means ruin. Could you imagine naming your kid Ruin, R-U-I-N? You know, as soon as they're born, you go, boy, a ruin. You know, now we have plenty of ruins here in Ireland. You know, look, I come from a country that is now embarking on 250 years of age. That's baby stuff compared to over here. If you go up to Dromore, for instance, and see the Moat and Bailey up there, correct me if I'm wrong, but King John the First, set up camp there, and he was what, from the 1200s? Yeah, yeah. So so you have this thing in Dromore. It's 6, 7 miles away, and it was built 1100. Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So there's things in this country that you can actually stand on and look at, but the problem is they're all ruins. They don't serve much purpose other than tourists come around and sort of archaeologists sort of people, which I find fascinating. I find all that kind of stuff really really neat. Looking at ruins, and I remember Helene and Elaine and myself. I think Alicia was with us as well. No, yeah, we all 5 of us went. We went to a dig down in Castle Ward, and they were. It was part of a group called Young Archaeologists. So it was a thing started by Queens where they were trying to encourage kids, to come and dig and find things, So anyway, so on the grounds of Castle Ward, there was an old Queen Anne era house that was there, but it was only the foundations. And so, but the foundations had been basically buried. And so they wanted to find these foundations, and so we were part of the team of people that actually, found part of the walls, and so it was really kind of cool. Now Helene was hoping for gold. That's what she was looking for, and the most exciting thing she found in this bit of foundation that we found was a dog's tooth. But I remember her so much going on to I'm going to find gold, So, so we found bits of pottery and a variety of different things. And I remember the man that was organizing the dig there. Every time we wanted to dig another, say 3 feet, he had to ring up and get permission from various powers that be in order to dig out then another square meter worth of stuff. So, but you had your little trowels and you had your brushes and you were, digging and brushing and blowing and, doing all this kind of fun stuff, So, but Shammah here, that, his name means ruin, and so it's almost like the man's name is hearkening back to those old things of distress and debt and discontentedness. That's the ruin that oftentimes we tend to sit in, and now, and I find this with names sometimes in the Bible. The name might speak of where you are and where God is taking you, but it might reflect back to your past, and but how God can change that. So, because this man Shammah was certainly not a ruin. Okay, so some people might look back at his past and say, that's all you are. But what does this man do? He stationed himself in the middle of the field, and he defended it, and he killed the Philistines. So I have underlined there, stationed, middle, defend, and killed. So, so these are the things that this man did, because he wasn't fixated on his past. He wasn't looking back at his past. He say, oh, all I amount to is, yep, I was a stressed out person. I'm in debt and I'm, bitter of soul and so on. He's not looking back at his ruin. He is looking to God. David has made him a mighty man. And because he's one of these 3 mighty men. And so what does he do? He stations himself. So he plants himself, despite the fact that the people fled from the Philistines. So this guy is on his own. All right. So he stations himself where? In the middle of the field. So he's not on the side of the field. He's not, behind a tree. He's not behind a rock or something like this and kind of looking over and going, all right, I'm on my own here, so I need to sort of protect myself. Well, no, he understands God, because those are the things that David is instilling in him. David is instilling in him the things of God, and not to look back at the past. Well, what do? You station yourself, and you do it right in the middle. And what do you do after that? You defend it. This was food. A lot of what the enemy would have done back then is they would have done agricultural warfare, which was, here, we'll blow up their food. We'll just
that word station too, like it's a
yeah
fixation, isn't it? It's strong.
Yeah. So and so as he was defending this food, he then kills the Philistines. So these are David's mighty men. These are men that came from some diabolical past, and yet David instilled in them great and mighty things of God. When I was growing up, I was bullied. I was told I wouldn't amount to anything, and scared out of my pajamas, and about a variety of things. Now, I grew up in a very leafy suburb of Washington, D.C., and all that kind of thing. And probably people from the outside go, boy, they're all dead on. But see, when you have your little fears and all this stuff inside of you, when I got beat up a couple of blocks from my house, I didn't go near that place for years. So, but you know what? I can go down to that block now. Because God's with me. God can deliver you from your past, and help you to stand firm in the things of Christ. Yeah, really bargain basement stuff. So yep, yeah. Yep, absolutely. And if you use these particular words, what did those disciples do? They stationed themselves. They stood in the middle. They defended the faith, and they got on with it. So and what happens at the last line here? So the Lord brought about a great victory. So God, brings about a great victory when we are doing what He wants us to do. So now, so there's all that stuff there. But now let me just put one more set of discussions, stories and such about mighty men, because there was lots of them. This particular list of mighty men was not 400 men, okay, but it was 30 odd. So there was a selection of these men, but I believe that where these men came from, God is selecting out certain individuals and certain stories, and wanting to encourage His people and say, look, these were men that were bad news, that were messed up, they came from ruin. Look at them now. So first, 2 Samuel 23. So it says, now Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief of another three. Okay, so this is another three mighty men. They tended to be grouped in threes. He lifted his spear against 300 men, killed them, and won a name among these three. Was he not the most honored of the three? Therefore, he became their captain. However, he did not attain to the first three. Now, the first three were the three that we just looked at. Okay, so Benaniah was the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man from Kabzeel, who had done many deeds. He had killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab, and he also had gone down and killed a lion in the midst of a pit on a snowy day. And he killed an Egyptian, a spectacular man. An Egyptian had a spear in his hand, so he went down to him with a staff, wrestled the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and killed him with his own spear. These things Benaniah, the son of Jehoiada, did and won a name among 3 mighty men. And he was more honored than the 30, but he did not attain to the first 3. And David appointed him over his guard. So now I find this discussion about Benaniah an interesting list of stuff. Okay. Calls him a valiant man, or he says he's a son of a valiant man from a certain place, but he had done many deeds. And so it talks that he killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. Again, when you look at place names in the Bible, Moab is not a place of blessing. Okay, it's a place of incest. It's a place that's wrong. It's a place that was spawned from bad things, and but there are strong elements that can come out of these environments, and so you have these 2 lion-like heroes. Now, I'm not quite sure what that really looks like, other than they're probably really ferocious and really nasty. So and don't have much fear. When my father hunted bear in Alaska, no, sorry, he didn't hunt bear in Alaska. He was hunting moose in Alaska, but they had to deal with bear if bear was about. Okay, now we're not talking about cuddly koala bears here, nor are we talking about a nice eastern black bear. Now eastern black bear, can stand about the height of me when they're on their hind legs. They can do you damage, but oftentimes they're just very curious sort of animals and would like to give you a hug. And if you do hug a bear, you'll have to go and get a shower, because they're real slimy sort of characters. I know, because I touched a black bear one time. But the bear that is in Alaska, these are Alaska brown bears, which are very much associated with grizzlies. They can stand to 8 or 9 feet when they're on their hind legs. That's big stuff. And one thing my father learned about these bears was that they had no fear of man. None. Because they understood their own power. So you have these 2 lion-like heroes of Moab, and he deals with these men. But again, people like Benaniah, who had come from these backgrounds of distress and debt and discontentedness, David, invested in these men, was consumed with these men, showed them God, and says, you can trust God too. And so this is what he does. Now, he also goes, as it says here, he also had gone and killed a lion in the midst of a pit on a snowy day. Now, that's a really bizarre batch of detail. So, okay, we killed a lion. Okay, we get that. And then you have these 3 prepositional phrases after this: in the midst of a pit on a snowy day. Okay, so you have 3 different prepositional phrases that aren't necessary for the sentence to actually hang in there, because all you need is killed a lion. That's all you need. But when you add this detail, you say, okay, it's in the midst of something, and it's in the midst of a pit. And even worse, it's on a snowy day. Now, what's the big deal about the snowy day? Well, if you think about a pit and there is snow inside the pit, and this is like a deep pit, can you imagine trying to climb out of the pit where there's ice and snow? So here we have a man who is well equipped. He trusts God, even in the midst of a difficult situation on a slippery slope. So you can probably come up with all kinds of metaphors and different things there. But I think it can encourage us and say, Lord, help me to be like Benaniah today. I'm in a pit. I'm in the midst of it, and it's really hard to get out of. But yet he killed this lion in the midst of this thing in the snowy day. So and then so we have the two lion-like heroes of Moab. We have the lion in the midst of a pit on a snowy day. This all sounds grand and nearly tires us out reading the darn thing. And now he, in verse 21, kills an Egyptian, and that Egyptian is described as a spectacular man. That's in fact, I don't think that word spectacular is used anywhere else in the Bible. I mean, that's a big word. I mean, to think about somebody who's spectacular, it's like, this guy is huger than huge. Huh? I would say it probably means more he is large. He's big, he's well armed. I would say he's important. See, what would happen back then, and this is what happened with Goliath, is that armies would station themselves against each other and then send out champions, and whoever beats the champion, okay, that's who wins. So the Egyptians were quite keen about taking over this part of the world. They're always trying to do that, never with great amount of success, mind you, but there's always these pharaohs that are trying to get that part of the world. So now it says that the Egyptian had a spear in his hand. So spear meaning that it was a forged metal thing, and this spear, a lot of the spears of ancient times not only had a large, pointy metal bit on one end, but they also had a big, heavy metal bit on the other end as well. Not so much as a weapon thing, but to counterbalance how this thing would throw. So, so what is he? So he goes down. Benaiah goes down what? With a staff. So he's going down with a stick. And it says that he wrestles the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and then kills him with his own spear. This is a remarkable thing. So and so then it says in verse 22, these things Benaiah the son of Jehoiada did, and won a name among the three mighty men. So now there's other stories that are in this chapter as well. There's the story about the three men that went when David had said, "I'd love to have a drink of water from the well of Bethlehem," and these three mighty men, they broke through the army of the Philistines, got the drink of water, brought it back to David, and David wouldn't drink it because those men had put themselves into jeopardy. So he then offered and poured that out before the Lord. But and then there's the list of all the 30 odd men, which we'll not get into. But I'm just highlighting these particular men because they were the men that were distressed. They were the men that were in debt. They were the men that were discontented. And look what they do now for God. So.